Okay, welcome everybody. We are celebrating Coastal Horizon's 50th anniversary of service in our community and in our state. And this is the first in the series of these virtual forums every month to celebrate Coastal Horizon's 50th anniversary and to educate our community and our state about the depth and breadth of services Coastal Horizons has to offer. I'm Ashlea Kosikowski from WECT News, and I want to introduce our panelists for today. We have Margaret Weller-Stargell. She may look familiar if you're looking at me thinking, WECT? She looks very familiar. Yes, Margaret is Frances Weller's twin sister. She is the president and CEO of Coastal Horizons, has been there now for 36 years, Margaret?
Almost 36 years, yes.
36 years. And we also want to bring in Flo Stein-Bolton. She is the visionary behind Coastal Horizons. She began this organization and talk about humble beginnings. I just met Flo yesterday. I don't know how I've lived without Flo in my life so far, but she is wonderful. And I look forward to sharing the story of Coastal Horizons with all of you out there. Now, there will be a Q&A at the end, so you can enter your questions in the comment section on Facebook, or there's also that Q&A feature on this Zoom webinar. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for this first in this series of monthly forums. First, we want to start with Flo. We want to bring in Flo Stein-Bolton. And I think the story of how Coastal Horizons started is so fascinating. Just 2 employees, just a few $1,000s. So Flo, tell us about the beginnings.
The beginnings, well, I just want to say thank you for doing this, and to Margaret. It is pretty amazing legacy to have a 50-year anniversary, because I'm not that old. It's hard for me to remember back. But in the 70s, in the early 70s, the United States was kind of in the same kind of stressful dilemma that it's in right now. People were concerned about the Vietnam War. Kids were just starting to use drugs. I was saying yesterday, New Hanover High School had its first arrests for possession of marijuana. And there were also lots of kids and their parents who were having conflict. So there were a lot of kids on the street, people wanted to go to California for the love-ins. There was a lot of things going on. The beginning of psychedelic music and the introduction of LSD and lots of things. So when I moved to Wilmington, I noticed that we really didn't have very many services for especially young people or people who felt disenfranchised, people who felt like the regular traditional system might not accommodate them or welcome them. And so we started the first part of the program, which was Crisis Line Open House, which is still there. And we had an old house at 610 Market Street. It was one of the Bellamy houses. It was in very bad shape, but it was donated, so we couldn't argue with that. And we went to the county commissioners and said, this is what we'd like to do. We think we can respond to people in Wilmington, and let's see. And the county commissioners were just the first of many, many institutions and groups that supported this idea. And they gave us $14,000 and said, go for it, and we did.
And that has grown. The organization has grown from $14,000 starting out with that. But all thanks to community partnerships, really. You had a lot of support from UNCW and other agencies.
Exactly. We always have had a wonderful board, a board that was really important. That, like, when I went to the county commissioners, I didn't go by myself. Nobody would know me, but I went with Kenneth Sprunt, who some of you might know from Orton Plantation. And he said this was a really good idea. One of the things the commissioners said is that we don't mind doing this and supporting this idea, but we think you should go get assigned approval from each of the law enforcement officers in New Hanover County. So that was at that time Sheriff Gorman and the police chief of Wilmington, the police chief of Wrightsville Beach, and the police chief of Carolina Beach. And so I thought, well, okay, I can do that. So I went to meet each of them and tell them what we're going to do and how we would not contradict their need to, you know, arrest people, but could they not come to our facility to do it? And they all said yes. And I'll just mention this because it's one of the exciting parts of my story. Chief Paget was the police chief at Carolina Beach. And he said to me, he says, you can do this, but I'm just going to give you one piece of advice. Go out to UNCW and find Worth Bolton, and he will help you do this. You will have no credibility without him. I said, okay, I can agree with that. And that's what I did. Worth was a student at UNCW on study release from the prison unit. He was a decorated combat veteran from Vietnam, but he came back and sort of stumbled right out of the gates trying to reintegrate into society, which wasn't so sure they wanted any of those veterans back. But what Chief Paget said was true. Worth started helping recruit volunteers, and the first part of Coastal Horizons, which was Crisis Line Open House, had those 2 staff people and about 70 volunteers. And those volunteers, the university helped by giving those students the ability to earn credit for their work there and what they were learning about human services and counseling. And so that was really a great start. So you've already heard political leadership. There was faith-based leadership. A lot of churches helped get things going, donated things. Some of you might remember Daniel Gatovy, a physician in the community, and his wife, Karen Gatovy, was a county commissioner. Well, Dr. Gatovy recruited 7 doctors, and they operated a free clinic every Thursday night for people who just didn't know where else to seek help. And that was, of course, the beginning of the AIDS epidemic. So there were lots of problems out there which people were reluctant to seek care. So that free clinic probably is what made open house work. That's what people really needed and wanted, and that's what they came for. So we had, as I said, lots of support, lots of the community businesses around town liked to support, especially open house. They really liked helping the kids. You know, they would get all kinds of, you know, toiletries and things that kids needed, although they're not kids, they were teenagers. And we used to do some projects like our outdoor adventure program, which is still there. We used to do a thing called New Games, which we would go to like DuPont or GE and do family picnics for them and help them by facilitating all these non-competitive new games, which are really old games. The games that all those parents used to play, but their kids don't know them anymore. But so it's really exciting.
Well, I heard you mention Worth. I mean, there is a love story in the start of Coastal Horizons too.
Really? Yes, there was. Worth became my husband. He was such a good guy. And I remember he did some PSAs for Crisis Line Open House and Coastal Horizons on the radio, and I heard them, and they were so cool. They were Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, and all these, Bill Withers, great. And then we found out you're not allowed to do that without paying royalties. But they lasted about 3 or 4 weeks. So that was great. And I think I told you we had tie-dye curtains.
I love the tie-dye curtains. That's hilarious. And the Historic Wilmington Foundation. One thing hasn't changed.
Whoa. They said you've done 2 things wrong already. You have tie-dye curtains and you painted the door orange. It cannot be. It has to be blue, black, or green. Okay.
So it's been 50 years, but one thing hasn't changed. The Historical Wilmington Foundation will still get you.
Yes, they will. But that's what I love about Wilmington. I've been looking at the before and after pictures that people have been putting on Facebook, and they are fabulous. Wilmington, I wrote a comment the other day and said, I am so glad we have preserved so much of this history in these buildings. So it does look a little bit different, but some of the really great buildings are still there.
Now back to the history of
Yes.
Coastal Horizons. I remember you said you went to county commissioners and they just basically gave you the money and you were thinking, well, that was easy. But you
Right.
had some help there with you, right? You were with
I
another,
did.
you had some support.
I had the board support, which, as I said, we had a great board. And, you know, I say it's easy like that, and Margaret knows this best of all. You have to produce something. You have to report. They have to be confident that what they're investing in is helping people, that is having the outcomes that they expected, that you told them they should expect. So people getting in recovery, getting their mental health problems solved, reducing suicides, reducing homelessness, all those things are part of a program like this. And I was saying another contribution of Coastal Horizons is that 50 years ago, the programs were starting up in different communities around the state. Like there was Switchboard in Chapel Hill, and notorious crisis center. And but there weren't any rules, and it's real important to have guidelines and rules to protect public safety. And so one of the big contributions Coastal has made is being part of the development of that structure of the system. So what we could do 50 years ago and the kind of program that Margaret is directing now is very, very different. People have to be credentialed. You know, there are laws and requirements and licensing and just all kind of things, which are all important. And I think we helped contribute to that.
And you talked about mental health and recovery, but also while you were getting started at Coastal Horizons, you started the Rape Crisis Center. Can you talk
Right.
about the beginnings of that?
Right, I would love to. One of the things about a crisis center that's really working well is that you'll be getting calls and you're getting people walking in and they have problems. And sometimes there's a resource in the community and sometimes there isn't. If you start getting a number of those kinds of calls and there is no resource, then you have to find somebody to do it or you do it yourself. And we were really good at recruiting volunteers. And so a rape crisis center started with Margaret and some other staff and a group of volunteers who would meet rape victims at the emergency room and stay with them, help them, coach them, try to get them, you know, settled down and recover from the trauma that they experienced. One of my friends, who's Mary Easley, was the governor's wife, Governor Easley's wife. She also was one of the most important people because the thing about rape crisis is it's often very hard to prosecute it. So women don't want to tell what happened to them if they think that it might endanger them or they don't want to tell the story. But if there's somebody at the courthouse that also will support them, that's how you really build a rape crisis program. And Mary Easley did that. She was the assistant district attorney and she kind of made it her project. And that helped it work. And Coastal Horizons has always worked with the justice system. I mean, giving people who have made mistakes and get involved in supervision of the justice system need an opportunity to rehabilitate themselves. They need an opportunity to make amends to the community and their families. And all the work that Coastal Horizons does with the court system, the jail, the prisons, prison treatment is really an important part of the identity of the program. I just read this morning that in an effort to try to get people with COVID out of the prisons because they're at high risk and they expose everybody else, the jails are overflowing. So I thought, uh-oh, Margaret, get down to the jail because they're having a bad problem. But that's just how it is. Something happens and then you respond to it. And Coastal has always been great at responding to community needs. And the community's been great back to Coastal.
And speaking of those community needs, we want to bring Margaret Weller-Stargell into the conversation now. So Margaret, what are you seeing when it comes to Well, first, let's look back. I mean, Flo really got the ball rolling of this great organization that now serves some 50 counties, more than 50 counties in our 100 county state.
Yes, 57 counties. And I have to tell you, Ashley, I'm sitting and listening to Flo, and we've had conversations, many conversations over the years. And it's so interesting how every time we talk, I learn something new, about Coastal Horizons and the history of it. And, I just want to say too, I want to say thank you to Flo, because not only do we consider her the founder of this organization, we consider her the visionary behind this organization, because as Flo was talking about, if you saw the need in the community, what they did back then was they found a way to meet that need. And that has been the philosophy of Coastal all 50 years. We followed in that tradition and followed with that vision that Flo set forward many, many years ago. And as a result, we are now in 57 counties and providing a wide array of services that essentially anyone walking in our doors in need, we're going to be able to help them.
And starting with 2 employees and now at a little more than 600.
Absolutely. We're at 602 right now, and I can assure you that probably in a week or so that number will change, because we have been growing immensely. And, I can't say enough about our staff, again, thinking about what Flo said and how they relied so much on volunteers. I look and think about that and say that those volunteers that worked with Flo all those years ago, we're standing on their shoulders. We are able to do what we do because of that foundation that they started. But the 600 plus employees that we have truly are the success of this organization. I am always incredibly proud and amazed at those who work with this organization, because they come to work every day believing in our mission, believing it is their job to fulfill that mission and to meet the needs of any person walking in our door. And even over the years, as things have changed, as Flo talked about, how we're not so much with volunteers now, as we have to have credentialed staff, licensed staff, doctors and nurses on staff. Everyone who works here works to make sure that we're meeting the critical needs of our community.
And one thing that Flo pointed out to me was that you don't see in organizations like Coastal Horizons around the country, you have volunteers and you have workers who have been there for 40 years. That's a rarity.
It is a rarity, and I'm so proud to say one of the things that we do every year with our annual meeting, and it's the annual meeting of our trustees, is we recognize those employees who have been with us 5+ years. And it is always incredible to see how many employees we have that have been with us for 5, 10, 15, 20, as you said, 40 years with the organization. And that kind of longevity, institutional knowledge, stability for the organization also is critically important. We also, and Flo talked about that earlier too, Coastal Horizons has always had an incredible board standing behind it, governing this organization. And I'm always so in awe of them, because our board members not only are there to make sure that they're approving policies and governing the board and the organization, but they're also putting their time, their incredible time and resources behind this organization. And that's because they believe in what we do. They see what we do. They see the impact that we have in the communities that we serve. And people always say Coastal is a great organization and you all do so much. It is because we have a great board, we have a great staff. We've got the ingredients that's needed to have the success. And so it's not surprising that we're celebrating 50 years.
You said one thing that hasn't changed over the years, Coastal Horizons won't turn anyone away. You'll find a way to make sure people in need get the help that they need to get through. So that's the same, but what is different from, say, 35, 36 years ago?
Well, I would probably defer some of that to Flo, but I would say 35, 36 years ago when I started, we did what we needed to do to meet the needs, but not always were we providing those services from a clinical base. Now we have evidence-based practices. Now we have different treatment modalities that we didn't have back then. So that's why we're able to meet the needs, because, one person walking in our door that needs a particular service might not be the individual that walks in behind them. They might have a common denominator of why they're presenting to us, but how we're going to treat them and help them get better might be two different models of treatment. And I think that that's, what we also make sure that we stay cutting edge to what's important, to really giving the individual the best chance of recovery, the best chance of improving their lives and being better.
So Coastal Horizons is in 57 counties. Do you find that the needs are different county by county, or are we seeing across the board the same kind of issues?
There are some commonalities, but I think that, yes, I think counties are different in terms of what they need, what the critical issues are for that particular county, and that's for states as well. What's needed in one state might not be needed in another. What's needed in one community might not be what's needed in this community. And, as an example, with New Hanover County, we have a high prevalence of opioid use in this community. And so we have to address that need in a very aggressive way, whereas another community might have more of an issue of alcohol abuse. We have to be able to address that issue as well, but differently.
One of the things that I find so helpful about Margaret's leadership at Coastal Horizons is, after I left Coastal, I went to the State Division of Mental Health, Developmental Disabilities, and Substance Use Services, and ended up there before my retirement as the deputy director. And the problems are more complex. The variability of the services in counties is very difficult. So one of the great things that Coastal has done, one of the reasons they're in so many counties, is that you're surrounded there in New Hanover County by a lot of really rural counties. They might have one small hospital. They don't have any treatment programs. They aren't organized in the same way. They've always had indigenous organizations to support people, but I've been working with Kenny House and Margaret's program to build some relationships in some of those rural counties to help pregnant women who are wanting to be sure their babies are born healthy. And that's a thing that Coastal can offer now, is the expertise to the counties that don't have it.
What do you think about why Coastal Horizons, where you see other facilities that may not have made it this long, why do you think, Flo, that Coastal Horizons has had this longevity?
Well, I'll say what I always tell people at the national level about North Carolina and why I think we're one of the leaders in the nation. It has to do with consistency. Some people stay in their jobs long enough to solve a very difficult problem. The kind of problems that face us aren't solved in 1 year or 2 years or even 5 years. You have to kind of stay with them over time. And that is what Margaret has contributed to the Cape Fear area. And what I think I did at the state level, I was there for more than 30 years. So I could kind of take a project from beginning to end. And a lot of because of how the political organizations of different states sometimes the person in my job changes every time the governor changes. And so it's very difficult to get something going. But what I love about us is 50 years. That's why Coastal is so good.
Well, I want to remind everybody that we have a Q&A session, and if you have any questions, just submit them in the chat feature on this Zoom webinar, and we will try to get to those questions before we wrap up. I do want to ask Margaret, you know, here we are in the midst of a pandemic, and we are dealing with COVID-19. The President of the United States, the First Lady, just diagnosed really early this morning. I think the news came down at 1 o'clock. Everybody's lives are impacted from the White House to North Carolina by COVID-19. So what are you seeing when it comes to COVID at Coastal Horizons? How has it impacted services and how you get this job done?
You know, Ashley, what I sound and say all the time about this organization is the staff. And when we went into the stay-at-home order back in March and had to quickly figure out how to navigate and change to that different format of being virtual with our clients, something that we had not really done and across the board way. We've done telemedicine and telehealth for some time now, but not with everyone within the organization. And so getting quickly moved to that virtual platform was challenging, but the staff were resilient and quick to get in place and to make sure that we would be able to continue to provide services as seamlessly as needed. And we have not missed a beat there. I mean, we have continued to meet the needs. What we've also seen is that even in the midst of the pandemic and how everyone is under an enormous amount of stress, and we anticipate that there will be more depression, anxiety, and all that we have to deal with, the clients and patients are keeping those appointments, whether they're virtual or having to report here every day for medication. They're keeping their appointments, they're staying engaged with their therapists, with their counselors. And so it's a challenge for us, it's a challenge for everyone, but Coastal is still there in the forefront every day, meeting the needs of the clients. And it's because of the amazing staff that we have.
And I have read that anxiety and depression are up because of just the situation that have found ourselves in. Is that what you're seeing too? Are you seeing more cases of anxiety?
We absolutely have seen more of that. We've seen an increase in the number of clients that we're serving since the pandemic started. And, you know, staff prepared for that. They anticipated that that would happen. I mean, we're all feeling, you know, some anxiety about this pandemic and, you know, the virus that's out there and what we need to do to protect ourselves, to make sure others are protected. And so they got prepared for that. They got prepared for that increase in the need that we knew would be forthcoming.
So what's your message then to someone who may be feeling not themselves lately?
I would say to call us at Coastal Horizons. Someone is going to be there to listen, to direct you to the right place that you need to be. If it's not Coastal Horizons, we have many partners within our communities that work with us. We refer to them, they refer to us. We're going to get you at the right place. My hope is, and my belief is, that we'll get you in the right place. Give us a call and let us know how we can help you. We'll take it from there.
I would just urge family members to consult with Coastal also, because if you see something, you need to say something about it. The suicide rate is spiking. We have a governor's challenge to try to reduce the suicide rate. We have more than 5 suicides per week right now. That's not all related to the COVID, but COVID piles on top of it. So we need to ask the question. That's our big theme. Ask the question. If you think somebody's in trouble, talk to them about it.
And you know, Ashlea, I do want to just note, as well as we're talking about since we've been in this pandemic and with COVID, we use the phrase essential workers, which is a little bit challenging for me because every person who works at Coastal is essential to this organization, as I've said many times already. But I do want to speak to those staff who have been present, needed to be here, even though we were at a stay-at-home order, even as we phased into some returning to work, some continuing to work remotely. They are those employees, those nurses, those doctors, those support staff, clinical staff that have had to be here in person, putting themselves and in many cases their families at risk because they're being further exposed to this virus. And they have been enormously on point every single day throughout this pandemic. And it's been incredible to just watch how that's happened without issue. And again, going back to our board, when we first started going through the pandemic and we knew that these employees had to be here every day, even though we were in a stay-at-home order, they would volunteer to sign up to make sure that those employees got lunch sent to them every day, knowing that it would be difficult to get out. A lot of places were closed. They showed their support there because they knew how important it was for them to continue to do what they were doing. And they've done so with, I'm just amazed by them.
Bravo to them and kudos to them, of course. I want to read, we did get on the Zoom webinar chat a message from, and I hope I'm pronouncing your name right, Soteria Shepperson. And she said, I just want to say how inspired I am by the work of this organization. And I have especially been honored to be in the presence of Margaret. She is super inspiring. And then we just got a question. Great question. Is there a story behind the name Coastal Horizons? This is from Yolanda.
Wow, yes. So as Flo mentioned earlier, I mean, years ago, it was largely not, it was started out, I think Flo was the New Hanover Drug Abuse Committee.
Right.
To hate through substance abuse, where it stayed for a long time under that name. And then at some point, of course, as we were evolving and having more services under this one umbrella, it was, certainly determined that to say substance abuse really didn't encompass all that we do. So we knew we needed to have a more generic name, if you will. And so going back to the staff, going back to the employees, it was put out to all of the employees at that time in 95, I believe it was. And you got to put in a suggestion of names, and then we went through the voting process, and that's how Coastal Horizons evolved.
It's such a great name.
Right. One of the things that's really important is that we've also moved to recovery language, which tries to get rid of all the stigmatizing language like substance abuse.
Exactly.
That's why we talk about recovery and persons with substance use disorders, but we don't like those old negative terms anymore.
Well, when I see the logo too, I think about new beginnings, a new day, the sun rising.
And that was a part of how we arrived at that name, because it was, giving that logo gives that message of hope. And, we, I think, see that every day, that there are horizons and new beginnings every day for those that we serve.
Ed wrote in, one of the strong points of Coastal is the feeling of family. And I can tell as you both talk about it, it does feel like it's been a family, not a workplace, not a nonprofit. It sounds like it's been a family from the beginning.
It is a family. And, when we have moments of joy to, be happy about, everyone celebrates that. When people have difficulty or sad times, whether it's the death of a family member, the staff rallies. I also think back to when we all in this area had to deal with the aftermath of Hurricane Florence.
Okay.
I remember one of our staff Don Robinson lost everything in that storm. And yet, a month or 2 months after that, she prepared, she had others helping her, but she was the brainchild behind it. She prepared this huge amount of food for staff to come and be able to fellowship with one another and just be able to say, we're going to get through this. And she was the shining example of that because, again, as I said, she had lost everything, lost her home, lost her belongings, and yet she was able to be that strong and that caring and giving to her team and to her coworkers to say, I'm going to do this. And it was a beautiful day. It was a beautiful day.
I will say that family feeling includes the clients, the consumers, the people who use the service. I think my husband's a great example. You know, he started off needing the service, started off in prison, went to UNCW and finally graduated and was a volunteer and later part of our program. But he went on from there to teach the master's level addiction program at UNC Chapel Hill. So it was a huge progression. It's because he felt like he could get support in the program and that everybody there wanted him to succeed. So I always really appreciate that. I'm a living example of how Coastal embraces the people who seek help there.
And you know, I'm glad that we talked about Worth earlier because when we look at the history of the organization, Worth was such a critical part of what we did back then. Before he and Flo moved to Raleigh and he went on to be at UNC Chapel Hill. But, you know, Worth was that person. He was very tall, very good looking, and, you know, he never engaged in a conversation with someone that you didn't walk away better than when you started with him, because Worth was that person that he met you where you were. And he always had something inspiring and encouraging and thought-provoking to leave with you. I never had a conversation with Worth that I didn't feel like, okay, I need to give that some thought. I need to embrace that and to explore that further. He was that person. And, you know, we talk about our outdoor adventure course, our ropes course. I mean, he not only was the brainchild with it, he helped build it. And so, you know, Worth will always be a part of this organization. And I'm so thankful, Ashley, that you brought his name up and asked Flo about him because he was so important to the Coastal Horizons. And, you know, Kenny House would say if he were here that he's very thankful to Worth because Worth is the person who hired Kenny House. You know, Kenny's name is pretty synonymous with Coastal Horizons because he is an amazing person in clinical services, and Worth gave him his start.
Thank you, Margaret.
Well,
absolutely.
Connie Parker wrote in, Flo, speaking of family, Linda Moore came to my door while you were talking. She said, be sure to say hello from one of the early volunteers. Also, a big hug from me as another one of those early volunteers who learned so much from you and who continues to learn from Margaret. Isn't that beautiful? I love that.
Yes, thank you, you guys.
I want to go back to Susan wrote in, and she wants to thank us for including comments on the topic of suicide awareness and prevention. And she asks whether the rate of suicides in our communities and in North Carolina have been increasing. Is that something that we're seeing?
We do see an increase in the number of suicides or the number of attempted suicides. And that is something that, you know, we have staff that work with that every single day and talking with those who are thinking that there's no hope, that there is no place else for them, that they have to, that is their only option. And I will say too, for the state, as Flo was talking about with the Division of Mental Health, Victor Armstrong, who is the director there now, pushes suicide awareness every single day.
Every day.
If you're not on his page or his friend request, because you'll get a message from him. And I'm saying that to anyone, whether you're in the industry, whether you're someone who is struggling with thoughts of suicide, please go and sign up for his page because he has a message of hope every single week.
I love it. I love
Absolutely.
that message of hope. I think we all need a message of hope right now.
Absolutely.
Right. Lower Cape Fear area has some special risk. We have a lot of military. They're at very high risk especially when they transition out. We have a lot of young African-American males. They're at very high risk right now. And then people who are losing employment or health insurance are at very high risk right now. So there are people who are suffering from the anxiety of all this, and you might need to do some special outreach to them. And that's what I appreciate what you said about Victor, because he's really doing it, and he has a t-shirt to go with it every single day.
Margaret, can you tell us whose page that was again?
Yes, his name is Victor Armstrong, and he is the director of the Division of Mental Health. Of course, I'm going to have to call him when we get off of this.
Tell him he's going to get a lot of friend requests.
I know that he will embrace that and be happy about it. Yes, so about getting that message out to everyone.
Right.
Well, yeah, he'll be having a lot of strangers. At least 80 people are on here who might be becoming friends with him on Facebook now. Well, I do want to go back to Flo. Margaret has called you a visionary. It's a word that is associated with you when you hear your name. What is it like to be called a visionary?
Well, it's quite a compliment. I think that, I'm from a military family. I was a military brat. I had never really worked before. No women in my family had ever worked. In fact, I don't think I had graduated from college when I first got there. I had to go back to UNCW to graduate. But the community opened its arms, was ready to support people. That's what I say. I think it's an unusual community. It's why I think Coastal has flourished, and maybe in some other places not as much, because our community, the people who live in our area and all of the counties of the southeastern area, have just always opened their arms and been willing to contribute money, equipment, goodwill. The media has been good. The law enforcement is good. Local elected leaders have been good. Margaret said the hospitals. I mean, it is a community effort, and I don't know if all communities are like it, but North Carolina, Wilmington, and the southeastern area is. And so it was just an opportunity for me. I was always surprised. Oh my goodness, let's try something else. And so I appreciate being called a visionary, but it was just an opportunity that a lot of people helped. Like one of the very best, I always say this at the annual meeting, one of the very best things I ever did was hire Margaret.
Oh.
Speaking of visionaries, so there's another one.
Right back, because truly, I mean, I know that, Flo's a bit quiet or reserved about, that title and that honor we give her, but she really was the visionary behind Coastal Horizons. What we've learned from her in terms of how, when you see a need in the community, you have to go after how you can address that need. And so much of what we do really is based on what I learned from her, what others learned from her, and how we go forward. And as a result of that, as I talked about our board's annual meeting each year, we decided a few years ago that we would establish the Flo Stein Award. And I said, I want to do that because we come up sometimes with awards like that when someone is gone. I want to celebrate her while she can understand how much we appreciate her contributions to Coastal Horizons. And, again, we have many staff. All of our staff could be eligible for that award each year. But, we have, and it's voted upon by their peers, we have everyone look at who has most closely embodied what Flo did for Coastal Horizons, and that past year and what they've done in their work at Coastal. And so it's an award I think everyone at Coastal hopes at one point they'll receive, the Flo Stein Award.
Well, that's a perfect transition to the last comment that I want to read that we got during this Q&A session. Hello, this is Dawn Robinson. I am sitting here in tears because I have been with Coastal almost 15 years and I have felt the love from day one. She goes on to write, Coastal has been so wonderful, all caps, to my family over the last 15 years. As a Flo Stein recipient, I want to say thank you to Flo and Margaret for believing in me, loving me all these years. I am speechless, and Margaret knows that I love to talk, LOL.
Well, she loves to cook, and she's the person I spoke of earlier who did the food for, amazing amount of food for all of, her coworkers, and she's an amazing person, and certainly was deserving of receiving the Flo Stein Award. So,
Right.
On.
I usually try to get there to present it because it's a really big deal to me. And one of the things about great organizations is they have a story. And they have people who transition through the story of the organization, and that's what Margaret was so smart about. I was very honored to have the award, but it's that idea that helps the organization be great.
Beautiful. Well, we're going to wrap things up. I want to thank Flo and Margaret. That was such a wonderful discussion.
Well, thank you, Ashley. I really do appreciate your taking the time to be here with us today for this first forum. Thank you, Flo, for being here to give all of the history behind Coastal Horizons. And I know there'll be more questions to come, and as I'm unable to answer them, I'll call you to get.
All right, you have my number.
And
I want to, before we say goodbye, just do some little housekeeping. The topic of next month's virtual forum will be services offered at the Rape Crisis Center of Coastal Horizons. Please watch your inbox and Coastal Horizons Facebook page for information on that forum so you know the who, what, when, where, and why. And if you'd like to support the work of Coastal Horizons, you can go to www.coastalhorizons.org. You'll see that lovely logo that we talked about there, and you'll click on the donate button. It's in the top right hand corner. And we want to thank all 80-some people who watched today. And of course, this will be on the website later. So share it with your friends.